Every year we light candles, hang wreaths, and celebrate on December 25th. And yet, the four Gospels never record that date. They give scenes, details, and timelines, but no calendar day. That absence has driven scholars and pastors to ask, if the Bible does not name December 25, can the text itself, together with history and the sky above, point to a more probable season, even a likely year for the birth of Jesus? In this exploration, we follow 6 independent clues. Each one is like a piece of a jigsaw. Taken alone, it is suggestive. Taken together, they form a coherent picture that points towards an early fall birth, most plausibly in the years before 4 BC. Strong evidence suggests this reconstruction, but it is not a claim of absolute certainty. Think of it as a carefully reasoned portrait drawn from scripture, history, and the created order. Here is the method up front. The Gospels give a timeline, not a calendar. Luke, in particular, links Jesus' birth to the life and ministry of John the Baptist by giving the priestly division of John's father, Zechariah, and by noting the 6-month gap between Elizabeth's pregnancy and Mary's conception. If we can reasonably date Zechariah's ministry, we can work forward in months. Zechariah serves, Elizabeth conceives, John is born 9 months later. 6 months after John's birth, Gabriel visits Mary. 9 months after Mary's conception, Jesus is born. That simple chain, temple schedule, John, Mary, Jesus, is the backbone of the argument that follows. Alongside this chronology, we bring in climate and pastoral practice, Roman administrative logistics, astronomical sciences observed by the Magi, festival symbolism in Israel, and the political timeline that ends with Herod the Great. If you enjoy careful history that meets the Bible, hit like and subscribe. There's more timeline work and source tables in the description. Secret 1. Shepherds in the fields, a seasonal clue. Luke 2:8 tells us that shepherds were in the fields, keeping watch over their flocks by night. That detail is small, but it is the kind of local color historians prize. Here is the inference. In Judea, shepherds did not keep their flocks in exposed fields through a cold, rainy winter. Winters in the hill country around Bethlehem are wet and often chilly. Pastures become muddy. Shepherds normally brought their flocks in close to shelter during winter months. Conversely, in mild seasons, late spring and again late summer into early fall, sheep graze on open pastures at night, and shepherds keep watch outdoors. Why does that matter? If the shepherd's presence in the fields is reflecting a real climate pattern rather than a creative convention, it speaks against a wintertime birth. We must be cautious. Shepherds in the fields alone does not prove a season, because some pastoral practices vary, and Luke's portrait also carries theological weight, shepherds as witnesses to the Messiah. But combined with other indicators, this pastoral detail tips the balance away from a midwinter date and toward milder months. There is deeper symbolic resonance as well. Those very pastures supplied lambs for temple sacrifices. The image of shepherds watching over lambs subtly echoes the sacrificial themes associated with the coming Messiah, another theological thread that fits better with harvest and festival rhythms than with midwinter. So the first secret nudges us, likely not December in terms of weather. Spring or early fall are more plausible from a pastoral standpoint. Mini-hook. If not winter, where could the timing fit within the rhythm of temple life and Roman administration? The next clue narrows the field. Secret 2. Caesar's census and Roman logistics. Luke places Mary and Joseph's journey to Bethlehem within the context of a Roman registration, often called a census, which required individuals to appear in their ancestral towns, Luke 2:1-5. That single administrative detail raises practical questions about timing. Roman travel was heavily influenced by climate, road conditions, and supply needs. Officials scheduled major movements and registrations during drier seasons to avoid impassable routes and to facilitate provisioning. Here's the inference. A major population movement from Nazareth to Bethlehem in headline numbers would be more plausible in late summer or early fall than in the depths of winter. Roads in winter could be difficult and travel dangerous. Successful registration of a widespread populace under imperial oversight would favor predictable, dry weather windows. That does not prove the exact month, but it makes an autumnal registration more likely than an in-winter one. There is also the matter of Quirinius. Luke's language has sparked centuries of debate because a census under Quirinius is documented to have taken place around AD 6, long after Herod's death, but Luke's Greek and his narrative context can be read to indicate a different mode of taxation or a local enrollment under Augustus, and some scholars propose earlier administrative registers. The critical caveat here is this: scholars do not all agree on the precise Roman mechanism Luke references. What is more secure is the common-sense observation that imperial registers and forced travel were not organized during seasons of heavy rain. Practical logistics favor later summer into fall. Mini-hook. The Romans narrow down plausible seasons. The temple calendar tightens the timeline further. Next secret. A priestly rotation mentioned in scripture gives us a surprisingly precise bookkeeping device. Secret 3. The priestly division of Abijah. A calendar in the temple.
Luke 1 names Zechariah as of the division of Abijah, Luke 1:5. 1 Chronicles 24 lists 24 priestly divisions established under King David. Jewish tradition held that these courses served at the temple on a regular yearly schedule.
If we can place one course in the year, we can date the sequence that follows. Here's the chain of inference, step by step. Zechariah's course serves at the temple. Upon completing his week of temple service, Zechariah returns home. Elizabeth conceives soon afterward. 9 months later, John is born. 6 months after John's birth, Gabriel announces to Mary that she will conceive Jesus, Luke 1:26-38. 9 months after that, Jesus is born. Thus, if Zechariah's temple week can be assigned to a likely period within the Jewish liturgical year, then months can be counted forward to reach Jesus' birth. Historical reconstructions using Jewish calendrical tradition generally place the division of Abijah's service in late spring, roughly May-June on our modern calendar. Using that placement, Elizabeth's conception would fall in late spring. John's birth 9 months later arrives in late March or early April. Gabriel's visit to Mary, described as occurring 6 months after Elizabeth's conception, Luke 1:26, would therefore fall in late autumn or early winter by strict month counting. But here is where traditions and calendars need close attention. Jewish liturgical months and Roman civil months do not always map perfectly onto modern Gregorian dates, and local calculations of months could shift dates by a few weeks. The point is that the priestly rotation provides a solid anchor. John's birth clusters around the spring, and 6 months later points us towards a conception window for Mary that places Jesus' birth in early fall, commonly reconstructed as September or early October. We must emphasize caution. The exact placement of Abijah's course in our modern calendar is subject to scholarly debate, because it depends on where one begins the priestly year and on how intercalations were handled. But the temple schedule supplies a calendar-like mechanism that, in combination with Luke's explicit 6-month interval, makes an autumn birth for Jesus a strong and reasonable reconstruction. Mini-hook. So far, we have pastoral practice, Roman logistics, and a temple schedule all suggesting fall. But there is also a sky sign in the story, the Magi's star, that many have tied to a rare celestial event. What did the heavens show? Secret 4, the star, Jupiter, Saturn, and the Magi's observation. Matthew 2 tells of Magi, Eastern sky watchers, who saw his star and came to Jerusalem, Matthew 2, 1-2. The identity of this star has been debated for centuries. Modern astronomy offers possible candidates, not as magic, but as observable phenomena that ancient astrologer-astronomers would have interpreted as significant. A prominent proposal is a series of conjunctions involving Jupiter and Saturn, culminating with a notable appearance in the constellation Pisces in the years around 7 BC. Jupiter was associated in antiquity with kingship. Saturn had particular associations with the Jewish world in some astrological texts, and Pisces was sometimes connected with the region of Israel. In 7 BC, Jupiter and Saturn underwent a complex sequence of close meetings that would have been highly noticeable to trained observers in the East. The conjunctions spanned months and even years, making them an extended sign rather than a single-night flash. Here's the careful theological note. Presenting the conjunction as a sign does not make the stars the cause of events. The Bible consistently treats the heavens as signs that point to God's ordering of history, not as autonomous agents. The Magi, as experts in interpreting celestial signs, might have read such a rare stellar pattern as heralding a unique birth in Judea. Their journey likely took months from their eastern homelands. By the time they reached Jerusalem and then Bethlehem, the child could have been months old, a fact Matthew himself seems to anticipate when he records Herod's order to kill all males 2 years old and under, Matthew 2:16, a clause that reflects the Magi's testimony about when the star had first appeared. Astronomical reconstructions do not yield an unambiguous single-night star, but they do show conspicuous celestial events in the decade before 4 BC, and a conjunction in 7 BC in Pisces fits a plausible scenario for Magi observation and delayed arrival. This aligns well with a birth earlier within the 7 to 5 BC window, consistent with other clues that narrow us toward early fall of 4 BC when taken together with the temple and Roman evidence. Mini-hook. The sky announces the event. Israel's festivals give it theological meaning. Next, consider how the festivals of Trumpet and Tabernacle frame the idea of God dwelling among us. Secret 5, Feast of Trumpets and Tabernacles, theological fit of early fall. Scripture uses rich festival imagery to speak about God's presence and kingship. 2 feasts in early fall, the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Teruah, and the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, are particularly resonant. John's Gospel famously says, "The Word became flesh and tabernacled among us," John 1:14, where the Greek word can be rendered pitched a tent or tabernacled, an image that evokes Sukkot, the festival of booths, when Israel remembers dwelling in temporary shelters in the wilderness and celebrates God's presence. Here is the inference. If Jesus were born during Sukkot or the surrounding festival season, the theological symbolism would be rich. Trumpets announcing kingship, the Feast of Trumpets, and God literally tabernacling among his people, Sukkot. This is not a proof of an exact date, but it is a theological safe fit. The timing makes the language of John and the imagery of Jesus as both king and God with us deeply coherent. Historically, Sukkot occurs in the early fall, typically in our September or October. If Jesus' birth were charged with this festival symbolism, an early fall date would carry liturgical and theological resonance. The shepherds in the fields, the trumpets and booths, and the shepherd-lamb motif would all converge into a season of expectation and divine presence. Signs in the field, stars in the sky, festivals in the valleys. One last historical boundary helps bracket the window tightly: Herod the Great. Secret 6. Herod, Josephus, and the lunar eclipse, a chronological boundary. Matthew's Gospel situates Jesus' birth in the reign of Herod the Great and reports Herod's brutal attempt to kill young boys in Bethlehem, Matthew 2, 1-18. That tragic detail gives historians an upper bound. Jesus must have been born before Herod's death. Josephus, the first-century Jewish historian, gives a sequence of events surrounding Herod's final illness and death, and he mentions that a lunar eclipse occurred shortly before Herod's death. He places Herod's death prior to a Passover. Astronomers who have worked with eclipse records have identified a lunar eclipse on March 13, 4 BC that could fit Josephus's description, and Herod's death is often dated to the spring of 4 BC, based on that eclipse plus other chronological markers. If Herod died in 4 BC, then any reconstruction that places Jesus' birth in a narrow window must fit before that date. Josephus's account, combined with Matthew's 2-year clause in Herod's degree, allows for some flexibility. Matthew may be using the 2-year figure as a margin of error based on the Magi's report, but the convergence of external history places a credible terminus ante quem in the years immediately before 4 BC. Here's the careful inference. If Herod died in early 4 BC, and if the Magi saw a star earlier, say 7 BC, and arrived months later, the weight of the evidence fits a birth window between roughly 7 BC and 4 BC, with several lines of argument narrowing the best fit to about 5 to 4 BC. When we synthesize the temple calendar, seasonal pastoral notes, Roman travel logistics, and festival symbolism, a concentrated case points to early fall of 4 BC as a particularly coherent reconstruction. Putting the 6 secrets together, a reasoned timeline. Let's assemble the pieces visually in the mind. Start with Zechariah's temple service in the division of Abijah. From that service, Luke gives the pregnancy of Elizabeth and the birth of John, counting 9 months from Elizabeth's conception, and then adding 6 months to reach Mary's visitation, and then 9 months to Jesus' birth, places Jesus' birth roughly 9 months after Mary's conception. In the reconstruction favored by many historians who combine the temple schedule with Roman and seasonal data, Mary's conception falls in late winter to early spring by some reckonings, or in winter if different calendar markers are used, but the best integrated reading places Jesus' birth in early fall. Overlay the Magi's observation. A conspicuous star or conjunction in 7 BC would have signaled a royal birth. The Magi, reading that sign, travel over months. They arrive when the child is already young enough that Herod can plausibly order a 2-year sweep. The drama of Herod's death in 4 BC gives a hard boundary. Jesus must have been born before then. Add the pastoral and travel considerations that make a wintertime road trip unlikely, and the temple calendar that links John and Jesus by months, and you get a tightly interlocking case: early fall. And scholars who prefer a single date often suggest September of 4 BC as the most plausible candidate within the bracketed range. Again, that is a probable reconstruction, not an absolute fact. We should highlight uncertainties along the way. The placement of Abijah's course in our modern months depends on how the priestly year is reckoned. The Roman census, Luke mentions, has interpretive challenges. The Magi star is not a single verifiable, unequivocal astronomical event. It can be read in multiple ways, and astronomers propose several possibilities. Josephus's eclipse reference involves inferential dating. All these are reasons to use cautious language. The evidence points toward early fall, most plausibly September of 4 BC, but scholars rightly hold at least some level of uncertainty. The theological heart, Emmanuel, God with us. Why does this matter beyond historical curiosity? The deeper point is theological and pastoral. The season of a birth can illuminate the meaning of the event without defining its value. The name Emmanuel, God with us, is the center. If Jesus' birth coincides with the Feast of Tabernacles or its surrounding trumpet festivals, the imagery is striking. Sukkot is the festival of dwelling. It celebrates God's presence with a people who live under the protection of the Lord. The Feast of Trumpets announces kingship, calling people to attention. To place the Messiah's arrival in that liturgical frame resonates with John's theological language: the Word tabernacled among us. There is also pastoral meaning in the shepherds outside Bethlehem. God chose humble, attentive witnesses, not officials or the elite, to hear the first proclamation. The lamb imagery, ubiquitous in Jewish sacrificial life and later applied to Christ, connects with the pastoral scene and with the Passover and festival imagery woven through the scriptures. Finally, the heavens, whether a planetary conjunction or another sign, are presented in Scripture as testimony to God's purposes. The heavens declare the glory of God. When celestial signs and temple schedules and shepherds' fields all converge, our wonder deepens. Practical application.
What does this mean for you? If this historical portrait resonates with you, what should you do with it? First, let the reconstruction cultivate reference, not division.
Knowledge of a probable birth season enriches worship and imagination. It does not replace the heart of the gospel. Whether we celebrate on December 25, in September, or in daily remembrance, the core remains: God became human and dwelt among us. Second, allow the convergence of scripture, nature, and history to strengthen biblical confidence. The Bible interacts coherently with the real world. When archaeology, astronomy, and ancient records line up with gospel narratives, faith and reason meet in a way that inspires awe rather than anxiety. Third, let the festival imagery renew your devotion. Imagine the trumpets calling. Imagine tabernacles open to receive Emmanuel. Imagine shepherds lifting their faces to a sky that witnessed a divine arrival. A short invitation. If this reconstruction has stirred you, take a moment this season to reflect on the wonder of God dwelling with us. Whether you find new meaning in the Feast of Tabernacles imagery, or you continue to treasure traditional celebrations, let historical insight fuel worship rather than divide it. Final thoughts and one last caution. We have traced 6 secrets: the shepherd's nocturnal vigil, Roman registration practices, the priestly rota of Abijah, an extraordinary celestial sign, the fall festivals of Trumpet and Tabernacle, and the political bracket of Herod's death. Each clue carries its own weight. Together, they form a strong, coherent case that points toward an early fall birth, most plausible within the late 5th to early 4th century BC bracket, with many scholars favoring a reconstruction around September of 4 BC. Yet the case is probabilistic, not absolute. Scholarly debate continues, and honest humility about the limits of our sources is part of faithful reasoning. If this deep dive moved you, subscribe for more explorations where scripture and history meet. Check the description for a downloadable timeline and source links: Luke 1:2, Matthew 2, John 1:14, 1 Chronicles 24, Micah 5:2, and Josephus are all cited there, along with astronomical studies and temple calendar reconstructions. Share this with someone who loves a good historical mystery rooted in faith, and tell us in the comments which of the 6 secrets surprised you the most. May the discovery of these clues draw you into greater wonder at Emmanuel, God with us, in history, under the stars, and in the quiet places of our lives.